Let's talk about ethical decision making. In every chaplain setting, you will encounter the need for ethical decision making. As a chaplain, you must take the lead in promoting a culture of ethics. It is important to exercise your pastoral authority within the setting where you serve by helping others understand and embrace what is ethical. It is important to acknowledge that many organizational cultures avoid discussion of ethical dilemmas. In April 2013, a study was published in the Clinical Journal of Oncology Nursing, Volume 19, pages 159 to 165. The study, called A Culture of Avoidance: Voices from Inside Ethically Difficult Clinical Situations, discovered that nurses and key informants describe a culture in clinical settings that are predominantly silent about ethical concerns, at least until a series of painful events and patient crisis forces ethical questions to come to the forefront. But ethics should have been part of the process all along. For example, according to the study, 65% of aggressive treatments were given to people in end-of-life care without consideration of ethics. It was as if ethics were not even a thought. Now, to be sure, there are many reasons for this tendency to avoid it. One of the most common is the incredibly busy schedule of healthcare professionals, all too often serving more patients than can be well cared for. How should the chaplain respond to unethical situations observed in their setting? What about a person at end of life with no hope of recovery? In the name of research and scientific discovery, doctors and researchers at the facility recommend an aggressive treatment that offers no hope of recovery but would produce a scientific benefit. The recommendation is communicated in such a way as to give false hope to a grieving family who does not want to see their loved one die. Well, what do you do? There are unending examples to consider regarding ethical decisions. As chaplains, you must learn to exercise your pastoral authority by speaking up and speaking out, by engaging in and encouraging the development of ethics committees, and by serving on these committees. You must work to develop a culture of ethics in your setting. Some of the reasons for avoidance of the topic include lack of training, no standards or protocols in place, overly busy schedules, conflicting opinions and beliefs on what is or is not ethical. And then there's also the lack of a corporate culture that expects ethical decision making. In a culture of relativity, who decides what is ethical and what is not? Where do decisions of ethics and morality come from? What happens when there is no way to decide between a conflict of different views? Currently, there is no standard-setting organization producing universal ethics guidelines for governmental, private, or nonprofit organizations. Each organization is left to figure out its approach to ethics on its own. Chaplains, of course, are typically governed by the code of conduct and ethics of their ordaining credentialing organization, and we must comply with it to maintain our credentials. Now, there is an accrediting organization for clinical sites like hospitals that propose required ethical standards. It's called the Joint Commission. The Joint Commission is a United States-based nonprofit that accredits more than 22,000 U.S. healthcare organizations and programs. The standards produced by them provide an objective evaluation process that helps healthcare organizations measure, assess, and improve performance. This is unique to clinical settings like hospitals. As a chaplain, you should become familiar with it and consider how you might modify the requirements for your non-clinical setting. In 1992, the Joint Commission mandated that hospitals in the United States must have several means of addressing ethical issues in place. For example, Number one, how should medical decision making proceed when the preferences of a patient are unknown, or the patient lacks the decision making capacity to make informed decisions? Number two, what specific ethical decision making procedures should be in place? Number three, are there opportunities for ethical decision making, and has there been the creation of ethics committees to receive education and procedural training? And number four, is there access to religious services and care that are part of the mandated expectations of the Joint Commission? I would note that many, perhaps most clinical settings attempt to comply with the requirement of providing religious services by use of volunteers only. Many situations opt for free and untrained volunteers. Often they end up providing substandard spiritual care by folks who serve more as a door-to-door evangelist than a trained spiritual care provider who can assist the interdisciplinary team. Here too, we who are professionally trained need to speak up and educate these organizations. Chaplains provide very helpful contributions to ethical decision making. We frequently serve on ethics committees. And since ethics consultations in clinical settings are so often concerned with end-of-life care, the chaplain or spiritual care provider has the imperative of contributing to ethical decision-making based on religious values. Therefore, as chaplains, you are expected to understand the sequence for the standards of ethical decision-making in end-of-life situations. Now, in order of priority, we find, number one, explicit instructions provided by the patient in advance care directives that are written down and legally binding. Now, if such documents are absent, chaplains must be familiar with physician orders for life-sustaining treatment, called POLST, P-O-L-S-T, or MOLST. Here, treatment directives take the form of medical orders. Second, if there are no instructions from the patient, the substituted judgment standard is imposed. Now, do you know what this standard is? You should. Number three, if there are no instructions, no known preferences, then a surrogate makes decisions on a best effort basis which are in the best interest of the patient. Part of this standard comes under the definition of reasonable person. In other words, what would a reasonable person typically choose in these circumstances? This is a bit subjective. Chaplains should always encourage patients to communicate their wishes in writing through the use of advanced care directives. Most clinical settings have written policies in place regarding the importance of spiritual assessments conducted by chaplains. These assessments become an important contribution to ethical decision making. But still, there are many organizations that do not have these policies in place. Some of them have no idea what the contribution of a chaplain could mean for their interdisciplinary team, and non-clinical settings typically have no idea of how to create a culture of ethics. Now, chaplains should always be prepared for ethically challenging situations in every setting. This is not easy, nor is this work for the timid. Some decisions will even challenge your faith and worldview. Not all decisions are cut and dried. Chaplains must be highly educated and competent in communication, religion, and matters of faith regarding both the ethical and legal framework for making such decisions. As chaplains, you should be advocating for and seeking out active participation in ethics consultations. You should seek the opportunity to sit in on and serve on an ethics committee, as this will be invaluable to your work. Such committees must be well informed. And to comply with reasonable standards, the decision-making process must include religious, cultural, and other expressions of diversity that fall within the scope of training of the professional chaplain. In your role as a chaplain, there will be many professionals who will look to you to help them navigate the maze of ethical decisions that must be made. Study hard, know the issues, and above all else, trust God to give you His wisdom and lead you into His truth.